Hi, this is Ian Desher, author of William Shakespeare's Star Wars, and you are listening to Coffee with Kenobi. With Dan Z, this is the podcast you're looking for.
The Empire is a disease that thrives in darkness. It is never more alive than when we sleep.
The Darksaber is gone. You've lost everything. Mandalorians are weak once they lose their trinkets.
Are you okay, Marla?
Yeah, it looks like you haven't slept in days.
That's because I haven't. There's something strange in the junkyard. It's making noises and keeping us up.
Bring me down to him. Keep the door covered and don't advance until I say.
Supreme Leader, don't get distracted. I'll go.
Right away, sir.
This is Vanessa Marshall, Harrison Dula from Star Wars Rebels, and you're listening to Coffee with Kenobi.
Hello, friends, and welcome to Coffee with Kenobi. I am your host, Dan Zehr, delighted to talk Star Wars with you. Ever since May of 2013, I want to help provide a positive, family-friendly, spoiler-free place to discuss this galaxy far, far away. Imagine walking into your favorite coffee shop and hearing a discussion of Star Wars films, Disney Plus live action, animation, books, comics, collectibles, or Star Wars experiences at the Disney theme parks. I want to share that experience here on this podcast, weekly interactive live video every Tuesday night, my website, special events, email newsletter, and more. Find out more and join our Star Wars community at www.coffeewithkenobi.com. Thank you to the official travel partner of Coffee with Kenobi, MEI and Mouse Fan Travel. Check out coffeewithkenobi.com/mousefantravel for a no-cost, no-obligation quote, and let them know Coffee with Kenobi and Dan Zehr sent you. On today's show, Greg Cass and Greg McLaughlin join me to talk about and theorize what makes a good Star Wars story. So pull up a chair, grab your favorite coffee mug, and let's have some coffee with Kenobi. Joining us today for a cup of coffee. Sometimes I'm tempted to say a virtual cup of coffee, but I think it's pretty clear by now. This is part of the ambiance of the whole show. I'm Dan Zehr, and I'm excited to talk to you. We're going to talk about the ambiance, in a way, of Star Wars. We're going to look at... Now, there was news this week, of course, about the Mandalorian and Grogu live action film on the big screen. We got confirmation of Ahsoka Season 2. And we've got a dearth of Star Wars films, books, stories. There are certain elements, there are themes, there are motifs, there are characters, there are ideas. They all go together into a good Star Wars story. But what is that specific recipe? To find out, I've got two pros here with me to talk about what makes a good Star Wars story. I didn't originally plan this way for it to be this tandem from one of your favorite Star Wars podcasts, but here we are. First, Greg McLaughlin from the Rebel Base Card. Welcome back to the show, my friend.
Welcome. Thank you for having me. Yeah, this was an unexpected pleasure, and especially when we get to our, the other host on this, I was pleased as punch, and so it's great to be back on. And what a topic to chew on. I'm like, I was getting nervous. I'm like, man, I got to bring it because I am in the room with two very, very knowledgeable people. Well, the other person, he's going to be the front of our tricycle. I like to make that joke on him all the time. And Corey, he's a gifted analyst of Star Wars as well. Mr. Dr. Jedi, Gregory Cass. Greg, welcome back to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited. When I saw the question for tonight on the text message, I was like, oh, I need like 7 weeks to prepare a course on that, not just, an afternoon to think it through. But I think we'll do a good job. Although, Dan, I know that we are in charge of asking questions and not answering them. So you're really getting us out of our comfort zone. Yes.
That is, I hadn't thought about that, but that's sort of fun. Turn the tables. I think it's always good, as a teacher to sometimes put yourself in that position. So we always can kind of empathize with our students or remind ourselves of that. And what we're all going to do it. So basically the impetus for this, on Pour-Over. It came out the week of Christmas, and the topic was what makes a good Christmas story. And I found it to be really kind of refreshing to kind of dive into the aspects and elements that for me made that specific story so special. So how could I not gravitate towards Star Wars, right? There are so many things that make a good Star Wars story. There are also a lot of things that make it at least not as effective, I think, too. I think it's pretty clear to state that not one size fits all. We all have our different preferences, whether it be characters or certain eras in the Star Wars universe, certain mediums where we like Star Wars stories maybe more than others. All of that is wonderful. But we're going to kind of try to figure out, is there a recipe that makes a really good Star Wars story? We're not going to try to please everybody, and I don't think you should ever do that. But there are certain things I think are undeniable. And I don't really have a specific list per se. I didn't ask either of you to make a list, but I think there are plenty of things we can talk about. Greg Cass is going to, how am I going to say Greg, how am I going to do this?
The one with the tie, the one who's wearing the tie.
Yeah,
the better looking
I'll just say Dr. Cass. I think that's perfect. Greg Cass, tell me, just sort of a overall summarize for you what makes a good Star Wars story, and then we'll get into the nuance.
Well, just that really easy question to start us off with.
Yes.
I wanted to say it was kind of a coincidence you asked me on for this question, because I appeared on my first podcast I ever guested on was the same question just before Rogue One came out. And the question was kind of really important at that moment, because it's like, we're about to get something that is not a episode of Star Wars. And what is that going to be? And what does it have to have? And what could you leave behind? And so to come now to that question all years later with all this media behind us and in front of us still, it just was kind of shocking to me to think about the changes last 7 years. That's not all that long, but it's been a very long time. So I put together a ranked list of any kind, but I started to think through the question. So my overarching note will be, I think it's really important that a good Star Wars story has to be deeper than just spectacle. For me, when a Star Wars story struggles, it's because it's more about the whiz bang pew pew and doesn't have that kind of resonance of something mythological or instructive. I think those of us on this call and the majority of your listenership, we come back to these stories over and over again because they offer us something a little deeper than a popcorn movie or the kind of paperback you buy for the airplane, where you're like, yeah, I'll kind of half pay attention to this as I fly through. I won't name author names to call anybody out, but it feels like Star Wars stories, to be good, have to have something that stretches beyond the kind of everyday action spectacle and something deeper, something that touches into the internal and helps us do the same within that.
That is a terrific way to start us off. One of the first times I spoke with Freddie Prinze Jr. when Star Wars Rebels was in its production run, he said to me and Corey, watch films where the last 15, 20 minutes rely on special effects and not dialogue. And that always stuck with me. So that when you said that, Greg, that resonated, because yes, if we rely on spectacle and forget the mythological aspects, myth again is a Greek word meaning word or story, then I think that's a really good place to start this. I am putting this in the Star Wars soup, because I think we're seasoning with what Greg just said. I think that is an excellent start. Mr. Roll Base Card? Am I ever going to put two of the same name on the show again? I don't know. This is going to be a lot.
This is like CWK with a side of Greg's.
See, that's why you make the big bucks with those clever little names like that.
Cass is a tough follow, but I'm really happy he went first.
That's why I asked you to go next, so I can just kind of pick up the pieces.
And I was kind of thinking about this, and I think I like the aspect of starting with characters that one can relate to. And I think over the years, they have done a good job of creating lots of characters that a lot of different folks can relate to. But, if I go back to A New Hope, because that's what started it all for me, and I know for you, Dan, you start off with a kid who just is stuck in a position, in sort of like, in the middle of nowhere, and he just dreams of being somewhere else. And you also have, like with Han Solo, the smuggler, sort of the rogue, the cool kid everybody wants to be, but we're all like whiny Luke. Or the princess, who's like, it's like all these folks that you could immediately get a hold of, and there wasn't really much exposition that you needed. And I think for me, like if I do the antithesis, and I don't necessarily want to like rail on, say, Light of the Jedi, like the first book of the High Republic. One thing that really hurt me was like it kind of tried to do like a Revenge of the Sith, where you come in and you're already in the mix. But so many different characters were introduced. There was so much was going on that I had a hard time trying to grab onto somebody going, all right, who's that person again? Whereas I think with the OT and maybe some of the other movies as well, it was easier to kind of like follow the dots, and then you could get sucked into that kind of character. So for me, I think it's good characters that you can relate to, and that doesn't really require a lot of work. And that's not saying anything against High Republic. I did enjoy Light of the Jedi, but it was really tough to get through that. But that was sort of the first things that sort of like I went on. I'm like, I want to be Luke, or I want to be Han Solo, or I want to be Princess Leia. I want to be somebody other than me. But man, I can relate to who those people are. That to me, that helps make a good story.
I'm trying. You're kind of messing. You're not following the rubric. It's very interesting that you say those things, because
it's nice to have been on Coffee with Kenobi for the last time.
Yes. Well, please make sure to get the home version of the game on your way out. No, it's not that at all. I like your perspective, and I think some people will certainly relate to that. To me, the ingredients of what make a Star Wars story a good Star Wars story is not what it's missing, but what it has. It has to be, for me, has to be aspirational. It has to foster belief in the individual, in the friendship and family and community and functioning society, and the healthy aspects of that. I remember at one point talking to a professor who I highly respect, and she had mentioned to me that she didn't like the Hunger Games. And I said, oh, interesting. Why is that? And she said, because I don't want my kids to grow up thinking that if there's a fire that they can't call the fire department. I don't want them to grow up thinking they can't trust a system in society. It wasn't a political statement. It was just a statement about, we need each other to work together to survive. And I think when you look at the history of good Star Wars stories, the ones that I respond to, it's ones where, hey, you know what? We achieve so much more when we work together for a common good. When we legitimately want to prop one another up. And I think there are so many examples of that. Rebels, Bad Batch, on and on and on. In Andor, and this is going to bring me to a lot of areas. I'll try to keep myself organized in separate paragraphs. In Andor, the challenge with that one, and I don't want to point out stories that worked or didn't work per se, as much as what are the ingredients of what makes a good story in Star Wars, is that aspirational element isn't there because we're building to that, right? It's not laid out for you. And in A New Hope, even though it's called A New Hope, which is, again, wasn't created until 4 years after the movie came out, that concept of A New Hope, that they're building on that too. So it's about a lot of different ingredients. And it sounds like for you, Greg, you want archetypal characters that you can jump into immediately and sort of root for without having to do a lot of heavy lifting. And sometimes, and that might be the medium of a book itself, as opposed to what happens in cinema. Because I think, to be fair, A New Hope has 20 plus minutes of exposition before we even meet the main character.
Mm-hmm.
What came to mind to me, I had a similar point on mine. I guess that's Steve to take our show's language. But a similar point I had in mind is when J.J. Abrams was talking about the work before they actually started shooting Force Awakens, the kind of pre-production, he discussed how he always wanted Rey's costume to be something that he could imagine children doodling in the margins of their notepad. That it had to be that kind of simplistic design so that somebody could do kind of cross stripes in the sleeves and really just know that was Rey. And I like that as a metaphor for all the characters. And it is an archetype, right? If you can, in your mind, you can just picture them that easily. You can doodle them in your mind, not just their appearance, but the characters themselves, and get drawn into that. I think you're right. It's relating to them. It's seeing yourself in them. And I do think, for a long time, it was very easy for certain types of people to see themselves in Star Wars. And we've only expanded that vocabulary in the last, decade or so, especially of who can be in there and who gets to be a member of the tribe or the found family. And I do want to note, I was trying to think through which stories were kind of, for me, really speaking Star Wars brain lately. And I identified High Republic and Andor. And I realized, to the point you both made, they are doing something really different. And yet, as Dan said, Andor should not work as a Star Wars story. I just started watching it with my wife. I finally turned to watching it. And she was shocked at how violent it can be, right? Tim and Cassian killing cousin from the bear. Sorry, I guess spoilers for Andor. But all these really violent moments that are shocking and don't feel like should be Star Wars. But I will just say, for me personally, that's the story that's gotten me so amped up about Star Wars in the last couple of years. It's so compelling.
Interesting. So that one from itself, it wouldn't necessarily be aspirational, but there is something in it that pulls you in. And my guess is that one of the main things for you would be just profound, impactful, dynamic characters.
True.
And I aspire to be Marva. if I had to pick somebody from that show, I love that character and Nemec, but that's just a cliche because I'm a dude in the humanities. So how would I not love Nemec?
Right. Hey, that's fair. Greg, what do you think? I noticed you were making some interesting. I thought you were going to jump in a few times, but you were very kind, of course, and cordial as you always are, as Greg was waxing poetic. But what kind of jumped out at you at some of that?
It's interesting because I remember, we were looking forward to. I know, Greg and I were really looking forward to Andor when it came out, and I think it's one of those where when you really saw like the combination of just the writing, and you're right, it was a Star Wars story that really didn't start off feeling like a Star Wars story, but you were kind of sucked in by the dark is like Andor is going and trying to find his sister and going through it and seeing the struggle, but it's like everything was just so good in it that it was really fun. And I think it was a great story that I think worked well as a series, as opposed to like sometimes you have maybe stories that are better for movies where you can kind of tell a story in a short amount of time. Whereas like, I think this one, it really worked well. And I think that's, it's been kind of, I think, the struggle for, Disney and Lucasfilm to try to, with Marvel and Star Wars, trying to find what makes a good story for a series. But, I was going back and listening to, Greg and I's first take at the Bad Batch. And, that first episode of the Bad Batch was like an hour. And,
Yes.
we really got kind of sucked in, and we were trying to figure out what the deal with Omega was and all this. And, and then of course, Bad Batch starts with, Caleb Doom. So there's some things we kind of know as they go in. And, it was just really, it really kind of sucked you in, and then it kind of goes through. And then, cause we were even wondering with Bad Batch, I'm like, okay, are the clones really going to be able to carry it? I mean, are they just a one-trick pony? Are they going? But you ended up kind of like getting involved with that, just kind of like, with Andor, you're following these folks, and you're we hadn't seen Marva before, but at the end we're like, yeah, hell yeah, she kind of gives that great monologue at the end. But I think it just people that you could just really latch onto, and that are just written so well that you go, okay. And maybe some of this, when you're talking about a story, it's like, we've had different kinds of Star Wars with the TV series.
Mm-hmm.
Some written well, some written not so well. If I hate kind of throwing a blanket over it, but some just, it seems like, what kind of Star Wars do you want to see? And listening to Coffee with Kenobi and talk about this, going, is that really Star Wars? Mm-hmm. Is Book of Boba Fett? Is Mandalorian? Are these Star Wars? They look Star Wars. They feel like they have all the trappings, but goes back to what makes a Star Wars and what makes a good Star Wars story.
So go ahead. I don't want to cut you off.
No, and sometimes I don't know if I know until you start you start going. Maybe that first episode, that first scene, those first 15 to 20 minutes. Do I want something new? Do I want to see some familiarity? Do I just want to be open and go, all right, come get me, and let's see where this goes.
Well, the example, I really like that too. The examples that you're both giving, I think. I think it's fair to say that we're going to not be able to come to a full consensus because there's still some individuality within Star Wars, and I think contextually that's wonderful because that gives, because there are open doors in this big beautiful yacht of storytelling that we can all enter in different ways, but at its core, what is at the base of that? And I think it sounds like what we really like. One of the things that I think is absolutely essential is characters that we care about, which seems like a no-brainer when it comes to a story, because there are plenty. I think it would be. I've said this for a long time. I love Star Wars. Obviously, we've all the two of us, the three of us, and people listening. We spend a lot of time, more time probably than is rational to non-Star Wars fans, on this wonderful galaxy far, far away. Not all the characters in Star Wars are deep or profound. Many of them are very static. That's not bad. I mean, you can't. Everybody can't be dynamic, or I think it'll be so heady that it might be hard to have this massive, wide appeal that it does. But there has to be something there where you're going to see change. And so I think one of the things I think we can all agree on is that you've got to have characters that you care about. For me, I want characters that change and grow. I find them the most compelling, and I want to spend time with them. I want to check my remote, and I want to look at the screen and say, oh, good, I still get 20 more minutes with Kanan Jarrus. Oh, good, I still get to have a half hour more with Ahsoka Tano. That's what I want. If I'm thinking, for a while, and I think this was by design, when Crosshair was on the screen, I felt a little deflated, and I didn't enjoy being with that character. His moroseness, his attitude, his nonchalant attitude towards life, all of that stuff. I mean, it's much more complicated than that, but at first we don't get to see that aspect of him. I didn't want to spend time with it. But then we get to season 2, and there's one full episode dedicated to him and showing his kind of change of heart to his attitude on the Empire and how he views his brethren. Then I thought, now I've got to spend more time with Crosshair. Now he is compelling. And it's about that journey that those characters take. Luke's journey is still terrific. I will never forget the first time I saw The Last Jedi, that when I walked out of that theater, I said, I never knew I needed this. This is a refresh. It's still Star Wars to me because of the characters. But another big reason, and I'm going to throw another log onto the fire, another big reason, and I'm going to pose this question to both of you. Do you have to have the Force or an element of the Force for a good Star Wars story? We've talked about Andor a lot. Nothing is in the Force when it comes to Andor. Nothing is even mentioned about the Force. I don't think, not even one time. Maybe there's a reference to a Jedi, maybe, but I don't remember that. So does the Force have to be present? Not lightsabers, but does the Force have to be present for a good Star Wars story?
No, I don't think so. And I think Andor proved it. I think it just gave it dipped it. It was dressed in that skin, but at its core, it was a good story. That that really, yeah. I don't need a lightsaber in every show. I think, and maybe even what I liked, even about Rogue One, right? That didn't have Jedi in it, but it had Chirrut, And all,
but it has the Force. It does have Darth Vader, and he does use a lightsaber. But it's purely about the Force, though.
But
there's no right answer, by the way. So
no.
Deep breaths.
Yeah, I know. But Bad Batch is Bad Batch is like that too. I mean, I don't need it every show. I don't, but I think the trappings of the universe are so much fun that it's nice when you can see stories that don't necessarily involve a Jedi or somebody, throwing a rock, but they're just living in that universe and they're struggling against something, or they're trying to create something, but it's within that galaxy, but it's showing us something more than just the Jedi Temple, which was great in the prequels. We got that in spades. But, other stories were just as nice that didn't necessarily need it.
Well, you know what? I was going to say it does need to have the Force. I really was. And then you mentioned Bad Batch, and then you point out the fact that the Force isn't really a part of the Bad Batch at all. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's right. Ordinarily, I would say, yes, the Force has to be in there in some way, shape, or form. But I guess the Bad Batch proves that this is about character and it's about family, found family, and the motifs that I think are rich with that. But Greg, Dr. Cass, I pose to you, is the Force required for a good Star Wars story?
1 second. Gunji is calling me from season 2 of Bad Batch, and he's upset with both of you forgetting about poor Gunji.
You. One episode. Yes. Okay.
I'll let myself out.
Doesn't under.
I almost had
point, it. It is there.
And
I would just say,
how cool you have Gunji's cell, by the way. Kashyyyk has excellent cell towers.
Yeah. Be looking for a new co-host, Greg. That's what I'm just gonna say, man. He threw me under the bus.
Well, the problem with having Kashyyyk cell service is the holiday special Wookiees call you. It is the worst.
Yes.
So the question made me think a lot about Solo, because I remember actually my first viewing of Solo, I got very late into Solo and I was like, oh goodness, there's not going to be a lightsaber in this. And at the very last minute, Darth Maul lit his lightsaber, seemingly just to let the movie pass without a lightsaber being lit. And so, I think there's in the Star Wars role-playing game from Fantasy Flight, they have like a separate book for the scoundrels and the rogues. Mm-hmm. And I always think that there is that flavor of Star Wars, and I think it means a lot to a lot of people. I'm a Jedi guy. There's a shelf full of Kenobis behind me, not a shelf full of Han Solos. But I do think that aspect really does appeal, the kind of underworld of kind of Han Solo smugglers and scoundrels and gamblers. And so I think that we are seeing them test out whether that is enough to have a show ride on or a film. It seems like we will have the Force in this Mandalorian and Grogu film just by virtue of Grogu being there. Mm-hmm. I also saw that Ahmed Best did not confirm or deny anything, but kind of agreed with somebody who said, wouldn't it be great to see Keller and Beck on the big screen? And I just screamed a little bit inside at the possibility and the joy of that. So I'm going to say, and I'll link it back to Dan, your word aspirational. There has to be something bigger than themselves that the characters are responding to. And I would have said that it has to be the Force, because the Force is the core of this mythology, and all the goodness in the galaxy comes from the Force, and all the darkness does as well. But I do think what we've seen in Bad Batch, it is found family, but in that show, it's particularly brotherhood, right? The idea that they're attached to all the clones, not just the ones on the Havoc Marauder. And Omega is an honorary brother, is a clone. And so that idea, and then in Andor, it's become the cause. And, I definitely would have said a show about Mon Mothma sitting in her apartment for half the runtime should not work, but it is so compelling, and it is about the cause and what do we give up to join in a cause. And to me, that again links into that. I watch Star Wars and I feel aspirational. I want to give of myself to something larger. I want to give the universe I want the universe to be better for my presence in it. And I do think the Force is the easiest way to achieve that. But if you're gonna skip the Force, you really got to think of something good to replace it with.
I agree. That was well said. I think I didn't think this was going to confuse me, but it sort of is in a very wonderful way, because there are so many different types of Star Wars stories. But at its core, there are still, I think, when you've got character, you've got cause, and you've got conflict. I think those are really good elements of what go into this story. But there's another thing too, and this one, Andor is really kind of the big fly in the ointment, and that's not bad. I liked Andor, but what I've said many times, what I didn't like about Andor is it was the first Star Wars story I couldn't watch with my son, because when it came out, he was 8. And within the first 5 minutes, when the protagonist shoots someone in cold blood in the face, I thought, this probably is not the show for my child. George had said, what did he say? Star Wars is for 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds. What did he say? He said it's Celebration Orlando in 2017. I don't remember the exact age, but he said that Star Wars is primarily aimed at kids. Or, and I'm going to paraphrase this, are kids at heart. Is that true? I will say, I think it is for me. I'm not going to say Andor isn't Star Wars, because it is, because it says Star Wars on the card. So that's it. But I guess this is almost like arguing is Die Hard a Christmas movie, right? A rose by any other name would smell as sweet, but that's not necessarily the case here. Sorry. Sorry, Shakespeare.
It certainly seemed to be George's intention as he got towards the prequels to really, I think maybe he had sort of a change, and kind of maybe it crystallized more for him, because if you look back at, Episode 4, A New Hope, what have you, and the Han shot first, or you have, Empire Strikes Back, which is pretty dark in certain ways. There certainly is. Whereas Return of the Jedi starts to kind of get a little more, cuddly feely with the Ewoks and whatnot. Definitely in the Phantom Menace with Jar Jar, and it was, I just, because this year's the 20th anniversary of the Phantom Menace, and I was watching 25th. A lot of that legacy, 25th, and watching a lot of that legacy content of them, getting ready for the Phantom Menace and whatnot. You can kind of see where he's like, yeah, I think this is where this needs to be, but I don't think that was always the case. But it just so happened, I guess, that, in the 70s when we were kids and we were seeing this, the movies were, they weren't necessarily that kiddie in a lot of the 70s stuff, but it was a little rougher time. But, R2 was kind of there, kind of making things a little lighter. And, like I said, other than him shooting Greedo, it wasn't necessarily as, people getting gunned down. You didn't see the stormtroopers gunning down, the Jawas and the Sandcrawler. You saw the aftermath, but you didn't see them do it.
You do see someone's arm get chopped off and blood spilling out.
Exactly. But yeah, I mean, it is just something where I think what maybe resonates with me a little more with something like Rogue One or with Andor is that, there was some Star Wars that was maybe built for an adult version of me that had that as a kid. Whereas, Greg Cass always talks about watching the Young Jedi. What's the animated show that you and Henry watch on occasion?
Young Jedi Adventures, right?
Young Jedi Adventures.
Yes.
And that's a great Star Wars, intro for that age group. And I think it brings a lot of great concepts, but it's something they can enjoy, but it's something that's a little, maybe it's something I just haven't quite given it the thought, or even like the Freemakers, the Lego series,
Lego Freemakers.
Which had a lot of great stuff in it, but it didn't land. And so sometimes maybe we are looking for Star Wars that meets us at wherever we are at in our lives, our ages, and our fandoms, where it's like maybe we want something light, maybe we want something darker, and once again, maybe we not quite sure what we want, and we.
So it's the cause. Those examples you give, there's the cause or the cost isn't there for you because it's aimed at a different audience. I like Young Jedi Adventures too, but my youngest is older than I think the target audience. But that series has won a lot of awards. It's lovingly put together. It's lovingly crafted. It's got some really charming episodes. Greg, what would your son say to this conversation?
I know I kind of lost him from Star Wars, and then we went to Batu last May, and I won him back. But I recently kind of lost him again, and that's the relationship I want to make sure he can have with it. It is Dad's thing to him, so I never want to pressure him. And he loves Mario, he loves Pokemon, he loves his own things. And I will just say, it actually captured my 8-year-old. Puts up with Young Jedi Adventures, but my 3-year-old loves it. She would watch that all the time if I let her. So I still have one on my team, as the case may be. I think Star Wars has become so diverse across these different shows and properties. I remember, right after the Clone Wars started, I think there was a crowd on the internet saying, when are we going to get an R-rated Star Wars? When are we going to get The Force Unleashed, but, super violent? And that was, to me, too far. I never thought that was a part of what this should be. I'm never something I'm interested in. And, you still hear that sometimes. They're like, oh, well, Rebel Moon is Zack Snyder finally getting to make his Star Wars. And there's a reason it wasn't very good. But I do think that my struggle with Star Wars personally is I think there's a tension now between nostalgia and like a real challenge. And you brought up The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi is a challenge, right? If you love it, if you hate it, it's because it challenges you and it makes you think about your life and your beliefs and your causes and all those things. I think there were a lot of people who just said, no, not for me, and passed and got very angry on the internet about it. But a lot of us who that film does speak to, I think we're like, yes, I want to be challenged by it. So the nostalgia piece still has to be there. And I think that does speak to the 12-year-old in all of us. I think it was 12. I did a quick Google.
I think you're right.
And so I do need a part of Star Wars to speak to that 12-year-old in me. And I know I started my comments by making fun of the spectacle, but I got to the spectacle and I got to see an alien singing a jazz number for some reason, but I love it and I'll watch it. And all those kind of silly things. But I do think that when Star Wars leans too far in that direction, it feels superfluous to me. It feels like empty calories, and I need the hearty proteins sometimes too. And I think other people, maybe some on this call, can disagree with that. And I don't argue with anybody's taste, certainly in the listenership. But it's like, when you're at the buffet, where are you going, and what do you need in that moment? And we're at a moment where Star Wars offers literally it all, I think, at this point.
It's true, and I very much agree with you. Star Wars is not Game of Thrones. I don't need an R-rated Star Wars because that would take away the spirit. Whether it's made with kids in mind or not, there's still got that element, as you mentioned, that sparks that joy, and whether it could be nostalgia for us who grew up with it, or for my students, think to them, and I'm sure both of you could attest to this. People of a certain age, The Phantom Menace is their nostalgia. 25 years ago, they were little kids. They were watching it or watching it on VHS or then later on DVD and so on and so forth with their families and loving it. I talked to a student the other day. He mentioned how much he loves Hayden Christensen. And so I told him, hey, I got to have him on the show. And he looked like the sun had opened up and sat right on top of his face. It was so cool because, Tim, that is Mark Hamill, right? Like or Harrison Ford to us. And I think that's amazing. So you mentioned buffet. I like buffet. For me, my buffet, we'll do my Star Wars buffet has character, cost, conflict. It's got a narrative that does challenge me. I'm an active viewer. I talked about this on Pour-Over too. Corey and I got in this big argument, the biggest argument we've ever gotten to after we watched Guardians of the Galaxy. And because I said, I like this, but didn't really make me think. He's like, well, you don't have to think to be entertained. I'm like, I do. That's me. So in my Star Wars buffet, I'm putting in, as you said, the challenge. The Last Jedi was so refreshing in a way I did not expect or know that I needed. but it took these archetypes of what it means to be a hero and added the human element. It added failure. It added doubt. It made the hero not so perfect, right? Perseus in the ancient Greek myths is not perfect. Hercules is certainly not perfect. In many ways, you could almost argue he's heroic to some degree. I'm not talking about the Disney version. I'm talking about the older oral tradition Hercules stories. So that's all got to be there. But what you also have to have is you have to have a good villain, right? What makes a good Star Wars villain is an episode unto itself. Do I need my villains to have the Force? No, I don't. But I need them to push the heroes in authentic, fresh ways. That's why The Mandalorian Season 3 was a bit of a letdown for me, because Moff Gideon went from this interesting, mysterious villain, and I welcome more information about him, but if his whole purpose and his whole intent was to have cool armor and take over for his own selfish, nefarious purposes, and he became kind of a literally mustache-twitching villain, I couldn't get on board with that. And I think that actor is too talented. They should have given him more to chew on. That being said, I'm not going to devalue my own rubric. I think your villains have to be someone that challenges the hero and makes you frightened. When I first saw Star Wars Rebels Season 2, the premiere, and Darth Vader walks out and he is dueling Kanan Jarrus and Ezra Bridger at the same time, we were at Celebration Anaheim, and my friends and I were literally screaming at the screen, "Run away!" I have goosebumps now. Run away! This is Darth Vader. I love Kanan Ezra. I don't want them to die, and I was so frightened for them. That's great storytelling. It's not because he's Darth Vader, although that certainly helps because of the history, but a good villain that challenges the hero. Thanos, one of the reasons that Marvel, I think, has faltered is there's no good villain. Thanos was the ultimate villain, and who knew we would need that? So you need that kind of pushback. Greg Cass, what for you makes a good Star Wars villain?
Well, it's such an important question to me right now as we start to think about the Rey movie. I'm kind of assuming Mandalorian and Grogu will be building off of the Thrawn stuff, so we might have some idea there. But also the James Mangold Dawn of the Jedi. It's like, what are the forces? And I really like the way you said it pushes our heroes authentically, right? That there's some real motivation there. And I do think, the book algorithm served me up a memory today where it was a video of George Lucas giving a speech, and he was kind of in a typical George way being like, "It's so stupid, you all. It's easier than you can imagine. Are you selfish or are you selfless? Are you acting for the good of yourself or the good of others? That's it. That's everything. That's life. That's the Force. That's everything." And I do love that beautiful simplicity of George's conception of Star Wars, which, one aspect of him creating it in the 70s, and this was touched upon with the reference to 70s movies, is everything was about grittiness and complication. And the Vietnam War was so hard to figure out, are we the good guys? Are we the bad guys? What's going on? That then having a mythology where it's like, don't worry about it. The people with the blue, they're good. The people with the red, they're bad. That's what we needed. And I do think modern Star Wars, if it's going to speak to our time, has had to complicate that with someone like Kylo Ren or someone like, even Anakin, / Darth Vader. The way they retold that story, or organized that story, perhaps. So, a good Star Wars villain to me has to be complicated, and that's for this moment. Like whatever stories we're getting, I need a villain that's complicated. It was about Force Awakens. Adam Driver said, "I'm not playing a guy who thinks he's evil. I'm playing a guy who thinks he's saving the galaxy." And I think that's important, that they have a core belief that what they're doing is the right thing to do, even though we can all see it misguided. And give the Thanos example, which is a perfect version of that, right? Even Killmonger, probably my other favorite Marvel villain, is a version of that. It's problematic the way we see him reasoning it, but there's a logic to it that we can't deny is attractive.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think scary. I have a strong memory of a 5th grade school assembly where the local fire department came in and put on their gear and came into the gymnasium only because children had been taught to fear that sound of the Darth Vader breathing and having trouble when they responded to calls that children would hide from them. And they wanted to make sure that they knew, like, we're the good guys with the breathing. And to me, that just says that there was something deeply primal about Darth Vader. And I also think Darth Maul captured that. He's not my exact flavor of Star Wars, but when you get into that deep level of archetype that is just like a figure out of your subconscious, I think that's when Star Wars really works. And because Greg spoke so poorly of the High Republic, I will say the Nameless have done that for me in the High Republic. Greg, you got to get in like 4 more books before you'll be there. So I'll talk to you.
I agree.
Later.
I agree.
Hey, it only took me 30 years to finish Heir to the Empire, so I'm right on track, buddy. I'm talking about 20 years.
Even Thrawn both showed up at the exact same time in live action. Mm-hmm.
Have I ever told you the tragedy of General Hux? And let me tell you, and thanks, Greg, for carrying me for a little while, because I was trying to. I love the fact you brought up Darth Maul, because I think Darth Maul, obviously killed off a little too early, but was given a great second act, allowing him to kind of, allowing us to kind of like watch him go through, and then spoilers at the end of Rebels. But the thing that, it's amazing when you watch Hux's speech in A Force Awakens, and there's so much fervor there. There's so much that you're like, this guy is pretty freaky. And as much as I love The Last Jedi, and, his turn to sort of more of a comic foil, and then to sort of just kind of be cast as sort of a
in the Rise of
he was
Skywalker.
the spy in the Rise of Skywalker, be sort of a spy, that I think that it was a missed opportunity there. Whereas in some cases, part of that movie was, to use the buffet analogy, one too many trips to the buffet for them. And I can talk from someone who's probably taken one too many trips to many buffets over the years, that too much of a good thing can really not make a good Star Wars story, or, way down. It's all about good plate management, folks. I think that's how you work a buffet. You get your plate, and this is what I got. And there's a lot to choose from, but I really want to be careful about what I walk back to my seat with. And I do think that in some cases you make one too many trips and you go, you know what? That last one seemed like a good idea, but now I'm kind of paying the price for it. But I would say that Hux was one thing that just, here's like, as opposed to, like, say, a director Krennic, a great villain, that, really didn't have anything there other than he just was, you really got on board with him as far as like what his motivations were. And even after he's strangled by Darth Vader, he goes, but I'm still in charge, and I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. But it was consistency and things like that. Like, even Tarkin, right? Tarkin gets a great kind of a second act in Rogue One, and you go, ooh, and you see that kind of in part of the, the Bad Batch and other things, where some of these guys really get to just chew a little scenery and be like, yeah, these guys are really villains.
You made me think about something when you said that, so I appreciate the prompt. A villain, like you mentioned, The Rise of Skywalker, Hux is a great example of, I think, a good villain. Killmonger is, to me, I think, the quintessential villain, because you can start to sort of sympathize with him because of his treatment as a child. And why I agree, you certainly do not condone or support or believe in the way he carries out. I mean, the guy needs professional help, and he needs kindness, and he needs to show kindness. He doesn't. He's a murderer. But you understand the why. You understand his why. You don't agree with it, but you can start to understand. And I think that's one of the reasons why the Black Panther, the first film, was such an exceptional film. General Hux in The Rise of Skywalker is a why not. Why not? Let's just do that. There is no why for him. There's no why really for Moff Gideon in the third season of The Mandalorian. There isn't 1 and 2. He wants the child. He wants the child's blood to further the glory of the Empire, and he sticks to that. We find out later it's for a different thing. There are a lot of reasons, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying that I think the people telling the stories did a bad job, because they didn't. They're getting paid for it. They're smarter than I am, and I'm grateful for them because they contribute to this conversation. But for me, and it sounds like you both are in a similar boat, our villains need to have a why. Why are they doing what they're doing? And are they consistent in that rationale? If the villain grows and changes, then maybe they're not a villain. And then maybe we go into an alternative dichotomy of what a character is, a different archetype, a refreshing thing. That's, again, The Last Jedi. Luke is his why is he doesn't know what his why is because he suddenly sort of stopped growing in who he is, and he's not happy with himself. Once he embraces that and becomes back towards who he believes, what his why is, then we see one of the most glorious sequences in the history of cinema, in my opinion. So I think your villain has to be someone, not that you relate to, but you understand their motivation and they are consistent. So that falls into my original thing. The character matters. Your character arc, however thin it is or however it moves around or loops around, there has to be a rationale. It has to follow a cogent, well-constructed narrative tone and path. And if you don't have that, then to me, you don't have a good story. So maybe it is just as simple as it's a good story, but there are a lot of good stories. To me, Star Wars, now kind of wrap up because I know we're running low on time. To me, a good Star Wars story has great characters that I care about, that change and grow, a strong supporting cast, a belief system that involves the Force, or something where you believe in something greater than yourself. You're not selfish or selfless, or at least that's what the ultimate goal is. We haven't even mentioned John Williams you've got to have great music. I think one of the reasons why Ahsoka works so well was because of Kevin Kiner's music. Because the end of that series really fell apart for me, which I'm saving all of my massive rant on that for when I get invited back to Rebel Base Card. I really am. So you've got to have music. You've got to have the spectacle that you mentioned, because one of the reasons we first were drawn to Star Wars is because it's got an incredible spectacle of things that we haven't seen before. Star Wars is so rich in its mythology and in its narrative structure that I want to continually see things that push the envelope of what these characters go through, what they experience, how they process it, and how we process it with them. Always pushing the envelopes of good storytelling, but not at the cost of the story or the special effects overshadows the greatness. Sorry, I just knocked down Sabine. Knocks down my action figures.
Somewhere Ross is crying somewhere.
Yeah, well, she'll bounce back. She's pretty resilient. So that to me, that in my final kind of thing, and I'm sure, this is a topic we can refresh and revisit constantly, and I hope that we will do that. So if I don't for a while, text me and say, hey, remember when you said? So that's my kind of my initial wrapping up sloppily of what I think makes a good Star Wars story. What about the two of you?
What do you think, Dr. Cass? Do you want me to take it, or you want to take it?
You can take it first.
It's going to sound like kind of a railing against, the corporation that runs Lucasfilm and all that. But, one of the things that I liked about The Last Jedi, and by the way, for those who really don't like it, it's one of the only ones of the sequel trilogy that has a great documentary that shows exactly what Ryan was trying to do. So whether it lands for you or not, you can see that he's really trying to go for things. And I do like having you'd have to, is it cliche to say a vision for it? But I would want whoever is writing a Star Wars story or a TV series to go, I want them to have the freedom to take it where they think they can go. Mm-hmm. Of course, work with the story group and make sure that, your things line up. But I would like to go in there going, I really like to see what the director or whoever got it, I want to see their vision. Because like you said, Dan, I want to be pushed as a fan, because I don't want my fandom to be locked in amber. That's the thing.
And recycled over and over again.
And over and over again. I don't need to see, I don't need to see a Death Star getting blown up every time. But I do like having, my fandom challenge and go, you know what? Let's try this. And maybe things hit for certain people and it doesn't, and that's fine. But I think, and especially since, been doing the podcast and whatnot and meeting, more folks of, for the longest time, it was just folks my age, right? Or folks around our age. And then you meet the folks that grew up with the prequels and, their Star Wars. And then later on, as the sequel ones and the Clone Wars, and you see like all their different Star Wars, you go, hey, they're really locking onto this. And this is what's keeping this thing going forward rather than just, oh, here's another story that does the exact same thing. And that's kind of going back to where, do I need a lightsaber in everyone? No. Do I need the Force in everyone? Do I need Gunji? Okay, maybe I'll take Gunji. I could take Gunji a lot. But I just want to enjoy something new. I remember, like, as we're talking about the 25th anniversary of the Phantom Menace, I remember going into that theater and sitting down, and when the credits, when the opening theme came on, I go, I don't know what's going to happen next. And that was the most exciting thing that I think I had felt in years. I'm going, man, this is awesome. I've got new Star Wars. I don't know what's going to happen. The internet didn't spoil it then, and I just was along for the ride. And 25 years now, I can kind of appreciate not only that moment, but what they were trying to do, especially when we'll be revisiting this and all the other things that are happening. And like, let's just give it a chance, but just don't hit that buffet that fifth time. 4 times to the buffet. There we go. There's my rule right there. 4 times. Don't go back 5. Don't go back. Take the check and get home. That's all I'm going to say.
I mean, now I'm just thinking about buffets, but
I have too.
So I'll go back. I want to return to my initial position with a twist, because like any good conversation, this has added and augmented and shifted my thinking up. So I want to take Dan's language of a good Star Wars story has to have a why and not just a why not. Because the why not of, boy, it's great to get Disney Plus subscribers, boy, it's good to make $1 billion, is always there. And I don't think they're acting cynically in the way some places on the internet would have you believe. So to me, a good Star Wars story has to have a why. And to me, the best kind of why is a truth, a deep truth about who we are as humans, who we are as a society, who we are to each other. And it's going to present that truth to me in the most incredible wrapping paper you could possibly imagine. And that's going to be the spectacle. That's going to be some crazy aliens. That's going to be some incredible duel choreography. There's the compliment I'll give Ahsoka, right? Like, I could watch those saber duels endlessly. And it's even gonna have the bow of a Gungan tripping on something, or dare I say it, a burping Sarlacc or a farting Eope. There's gonna be just that touch of, boy, isn't this just weird and silly, but maybe I tear in and find that truth faster. Metaphor is being very twisted, but the wrapping is still there, and I'm still going to enjoy it as it sits there. And I really appreciate what you just said, Greg. I didn't go on as wild a journey with the Phantom Menace as some other parts of fandom. The pure joy of not knowing, and I remember the day before Force Awakens came out very similarly, right? Like, what is this going to be? Could it be? And to me, I do think that is because when I go to Marvel, I'm like, can't wait to see somebody punch somebody else. But when I go to one of the Star Wars movies, what am I going to learn about myself? What am I going to change about who I am based on a story they're going to tell me? And they don't always live up to that, but the really good Star Wars stories deliver that in spades. And it's such an amazing fandom to be a part of for that reason.
Amen. A good Star Wars story holds up a mirror. Like any good story, it holds up a mirror to us and helps us reflect on ourselves, our culture, our society, and what we most want to be, or who we most do not want to be. That's great. As expected, you two more than rose to the challenge. What makes a good Star Wars podcast group of guests? The two of you do. I'm very grateful to learn from the both of you and to chat with you both about this topic, which again, I really think this could be a whole series. What makes a good Star Wars hero? What makes a good Star Wars villain? I think there's so much that goes into it. We've just scratched the surface of this conversation.
Listening to Coffee with Kenobi, you are with Dan Z, the podcast you're looking for. This is yes.
So please let us know what you think makes a good Star Wars story. But in the meantime, you're going to undoubtedly want to follow these two fine gentlemen and ask them their questions on all things Star Wars. Greg McLaughlin, where can people find you and your excellent podcast?
Oh, and once again, thanks for having me on and pairing me again with my sometimes co-host because, I went back and listened to the first episode that I had him on way back on like episode 65. And even then, and then back, like about a year later, this is like 2020 and then 2021 for the first Bad Batch. And, it's just something, you have this guy on, it's just magic in a bottle. And so it's just been so much fun to add that to the regular Rebel base card, show and channel and whatnot. It's just a treat to have him and some of the other guests we've had on, Jan Ross, Colby, all those folks have just been great. But you can find me on, and Dan, yes, of course, because we do have some hot stove breakfast packs coming up. I keep talking about buffets and whatnot. But yeah, it's been so much fun learning more about Star Wars. And you can find me on, Twitter /X, Instagram, Blue Sky, Facebook, @Rebel Base Card. You can also find me on the Star Wars Card Trader. There we go. I'm doing my job talking about cards. @CornFedTech on Star Wars Card Trader. But at any rate, and then you can email the program, greg@rebelbasecard.com. Like I said, we're in between shows. We've been kind of trying to do like a hot stove for Ahsoka because I think there was a lot more there. And like Dan was mentioning, like one of the next ones we'll do on that. I really wanted to try to get Dan, and my dream would get Dan and Albert from Cantina Cast, just because you have two folks that have 10 years plus podcast experience. And, it's just great to kind of assemble. This is sort of like my little, assembling different pieces together and trying to get that kind of, context of what worked and what doesn't work. And, it's fun because, when we go in between shows and the first show back, Greg and I'm like, man, it's been a long time. I really missed having Greg on, even though we had a lot of great guests and a lot of great content, but it's fun when we get together, and this was a real treat. So punching above my weight because, man, it's hard keeping up with you two, but thanks for having me on.
Nah, you're too humble, buddy. I think you did. You're marvelous. You're marvelous. We really appreciate you, Dr. Cass. Now you have to follow a challenging Greg that speaks eloquently. Where can people find you and chat with you about Star Wars?
Well, I will, of course, add my thanks. It's a pleasure to be on Coffee with Kenobi, and I've been exercising more in the new year, which means catching up on the archive. We've had some great shows. I was very inspired this afternoon listening to you and Tom and Corey celebrate, triumph, and admit defeat on your New Year's resolutions. But it was a really good conversation and a good reminder. I'm looking forward to part 2 where I get to hear what this year's resolutions are. And someday I'll be on with Tom. I think Tom fills in on our show when I'm not around. So when Tom are allowed the same state, we'll get there. But it was a real pleasure. People can catch up with me. I'm on social media, primarily Instagram and Threads @IonCanon. That's EYEONCANON. And I went ahead at the suggestion of Greg here and got ioncanon.com. And if people have enjoyed my thoughts, I have some blog entries up there. And there's a recent post talk through all my podcasting projects more specifically, so I won't list them here. But if people are curious, they can certainly check that out there. The most recent one is what live action Star Wars can learn from the High Republic. So that is a good kind of parallel to this conversation, where what I kind of thought worked in the High Republic so far could be pulled to other places.
This podcast is not endorsed by the Walt Disney Company or Lucasfilm Limited. It is intended for entertainment and informational purposes only. The official Star Wars website can be found at www.starwars.com. Star Wars, all names, sounds, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and or copyrights of Disney and their respective trademark and copyright holders. All original content of this podcast is the intellectual property of Coffee with Kenobi unless otherwise indicated.
This is the podcast you're looking for.
There's no one here.